And I made Aliyah when I finished high school, which was in 2005. So if you do the math, I'm getting close to 40. I was in yeshiva. I made Aliyah. I did the army through the Hesder Yeshiva in Ma'ale Adumim, where I served in Tzanchanim. And I actually, during when I was in active duty, when I was in what's called Sadir, and I apologize in advance if at times I don't know the English translations of military terms, because I didn't really know much about the Army in America, so I don't know necessarily all the terms in English, so I apologize in advance. But when I was in active duty, so we actually saw combat in Operation Cast Lead, Oferet Tzukah, in 2008, 2009, and I thought that I had, at the time, gotten my fill of the Gaza Strip, and then 15 years later, I found out that there was more. So I'll tell you a little bit about just my personal reflections, my personal experience. I understand that tomorrow you guys are doing a tour of the South, so I hope that this can give kind of a framework at least, and from my point of view, and hopefully we'll add something to some context to your trip. And I know that also some of you were here on October 7th, some of you, the Southern Hemisphere people, weren't. So I hope that it's shaveh lekol nefesh, as they say, that it can be meaningful for everyone. But as Rabbi Sasson mentioned, on Shabbat of Simchat Torah, we were hosting my wife's family. We live in Efrat, as do basically all of your teachers, and at around 8:30, 9 o'clock, I was on the way to Shul with my oldest son. When the first siren started, my father-in-law is here. I should mention that he knows this, and he didn't point it out, that if I was only leaving for Shul at 8:30, 9 o'clock, it means I was running late to Shul. But as we're going, there was a siren. I ran quickly back with my son. There haven't been sirens in our area in a while, but it didn't seem like anything too crazy. We assume the Hamas is shooting a couple of rockets to prove a point. We'll stay in. We have a merchav mugar. We have a mamad. We have a little bomb shelter in our house. We will be there. We'll come out after like 20 minutes, and then we'll continue. Our day. After the first siren, and then the second siren, it seemed like things quieted down. So I started making my way again to Shul. And a neighbor of mine who's on the Kita Konanu, which is like the local security unit of Efrat, drove by and said that I should go back home, I should get my phone, that it looks like that there might be a war, and so people who do reserve duty should have their phones on them. He also asked that when I get to Shul, to tell everyone that anyone who does reserve duty should go home and get their phones, and have their phones on them. But at the time, it didn't worry me too much because, they're taking precautions, but a couple of rockets is not something new. And also, my unit, which is just a Tzanchanim, a paratrooper reserve unit, generally when we do training, it's for the north. So if there's not a war in the north, then I'm probably not going to be called up, and I wasn't too concerned. At the same time, when I was leaving, my brother-in-law, Rabbi Sasson, mentioned that we were hosting most of my wife's family. So my in-laws were there, my wife's grandmother was there, and several of my in-laws with their families were there. My brother-in-law, who at the time was in active duty in an intelligence unit, came downstairs. He was running even later to Shul than I was, and he said that he had already been told he should go back to his base, but his base is in the south, and right now he can't travel down there. They told him you need to get back to the base the second that it's clear, but right now no one can travel down south. And he said, kind of offhand, he mentioned something that it was some sort of big event was happening, something was happening, no one quite understood what, but it looks like they had kidnapped some soldiers. And I remember saying to him at the time, it's probably fake news, it's probably Photoshop, the Hamas is putting things out there to get people nervous, but it didn't seem like something that was an actual reality. I got to Shul, and while in the middle of davening, my phone started ringing, and I had gotten a WhatsApp from my commanding officer, who just said, we're called up, go to Bilu. Bilu is our base where we go when we're called up. It's in Rehovot. Get to Bilu as quickly as possible, and we'll get orders. And that's when I started to think, okay, something is off here, because like I said, we're supposed to be up north. So if they're calling us up and there's something going on in the south, something is something's awry. I went home and I took my wife aside. I told her that I was being called up. I ran to the attic. I got my equipment ready. Tried to think of any things I would have needed to take with me, not knowing how long I was going to be called up for or where exactly we were going. At that point, my brother-in-law, and another one of my brother-in-law, my friends in the army joke that I talk about my brothers-in-law nonstop. So I apologize in advance if I mention my brothers-in-law a lot. They're good people. Another one of my brothers-in-law, who's a commanding officer, not in my unit, but in another unit which has the same base, had also been called up. So he left his family, and we were gonna go up together to the base. And my brother-in-law, who's in intelligence, mentioned that it's looking even worse than they had thought at first, and it looks like there are even cities, border towns, that have been overrun by Hamas. And at that point, I was certain that he was wrong, that he was mistaken. Part of his job is to look at social media, Arab social media. So I said, okay, it's fake news. It's things they're putting out there. It can't be that towns have been overrun. I packed my bag. I said goodbye to my wife, to my kids. I asked my father-in-law for a bracha. I gave my kids Birkat Banim, and with my brother-in-law in the car, we drove off. Someone stopped us on the way, a friend of mine, a neighbor, and handed me a big thing of kugel, because they realized that the kiddush at shul wasn't going to happen. So he gave me some kugel, which was good, because I'll get to this later, but that's basically all I had to eat for about 3 days. And we started driving. Normally the drive from Efrat to Rehovot takes about an hour and 15 minutes. There was very little traffic, and we had been told we have to get up there as quickly as possible. So I think the drive took us about 25-30 minutes. I'm still waiting to get a ticket from one of the speed cameras, which I'm sure is going to happen. And knowing Israeli bureaucracy as I do, the fact that I was headed off to war probably won't help me, and I'll have to pay the ticket. And so we start driving. We were driving. My brother-in-law lives in Lod, which is near Rehovot, and so he wanted to be dropped off at home so he could get his stuff ready. And we were concerned because the last time that there was a flare-up in the south, there were also riots in Lod, in some of the Arab neighborhoods. So we were concerned that maybe there would be a problem driving into Lod. So we said, we'll turn on the radio. We'll hear what's going on. See if it's safe to drive in. As we're racing down, and what we hear on the radio is, it seemed like science fiction. There were people who were calling in to news stations, to radio stations, people who live in the south, saying, there are terrorists in our town, we can't get a hold of the police, we can't get a hold of the army, we're trapped in our mamad, in our little safe room, and we don't know what to do. And we're listening to this as we're driving up, and we can't believe that it's real. It has to be someone who's pulling a prank on the radio, because it's so far from reality, the idea that towns would be overrun and that people would not be able to get a hold of the army just seemed ridiculous. And we keep driving. I get to the base probably at around 11:30, 12 o'clock. I should also mention that this is basically only the second time that I've tried to tell this story from beginning to end, so I apologize in advance if there are certain things that are a little out of order. Please bear with me. We get to our base, and I park on the side of the highway. The base is on the side of a highway, so I just park on the side of the highway because the parking lot is already full. We get into the base. Now, normally in the army is a big bureaucracy. When you get equipment, it takes a while. They have to write down your name. They have to write down the serial number of the gun, the serial number of your vest, all your equipment. And this time, the person who's in charge of logistics just wrote down Rami, one gun, and handed me a gun without taking down any more information. And then that's when I started to think, okay, something charik, something out of the ordinary must be happening if they're just throwing equipment at us. No one seemed to really understand what was going on. There were some people who had been watching the news, and there were rumors going, but no one still seemed to quite understand what was happening. And we were told that we have 20-25 minutes to get onto the Humvees, and we're driving. Where we're driving to, where these Humvees came from, I found out later. So the commander of my Gdud, which I think is a battalion but don't quote me on that, because like I said, I don't know any of the translations of these terms. At around 7 in the morning, he decided on his own to call up the unit. He didn't get an official order. He just started sending, he realized something was happening, and he just took the risk and said, I'm going to call up the unit, which is calling up 300 combat soldiers, and then another 100 or 200 logistical units, and he took that chance and just called us up. I also found out later that he had gone around on the base, and any unit that hadn't been called up, he just stole their Humvees, because we don't have enough Humvees for the entire battalion. And so we get on these Humvees, we have equipment, we have our mags with the bullets that we had filled up. And again, we don't quite know what's happening or where we're going. And this is already, 1 o'clock, 1:30, more news had started getting out about what was happening down south, but we were a little cut off because we're busy with our equipment, we're busy getting ready. And also in kind of the days of fake news, no one quite knows what to believe of what you're hearing or what you're reading. And we're sitting on our Humvees, and we're getting ready to go. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Naftali Bennett, former Israeli Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, shows up. And he just walks from Humvee to Humvee and says, I don't know what you guys have seen or heard, but Israel is at war. You need to get down south as quickly as possible. Save as many lives as you can. Kill as many terrorists as you can. And if anyone tries to block the road, shoot them. And that's when we realized, okay, something has changed. Because normally, if someone's blocking the road, so you wait and you try to talk with them, but not now. And then we started driving. And as we're driving, we're getting over the radio, we're getting the Army radio, first they said, okay, we're going to go down and we're going to do security in the main intersection around Sderot. And they said, no, we're moving, we're going to a different area. We kept the kind of our objective kept changing. Until finally they told us that we're going to Kfar Aza. Kfar Aza is a kibbutz on the border with the Gaza Strip, 150, 200 families, and we start driving. So some of these landmarks that I'll tell you probably don't mean much to you now, but when you guys go down south, you'll see them. So first we got to Tzomet Yad Mordechai. Tzomet Yad Mordechai is like the beginning of the south, the beginning of Otef Aza. And when we got there was an army roadblock, or a police roadblock. There were some ambulances, there was some news media, and they waved us right through, and we started driving. And then we got to Tzomet Sderot Darom, the summit south of Sderot, and that's when everything changed. As we started driving, we started seeing on the side of the road, we saw flipped cars, burnt out cars, and at first, in our minds, and I remember saying this to a friend, those must be terrorists. It can't be that there are cars burnt out, that there are bodies on the side of the road, and they're Jews and they're Israelis. Because normally when there's a terror attack, very very quickly they know to take the bodies out and clear out the area. It can't be that these are Jews on the side of the road, and we keep driving, and there's more. And then we start seeing women and children who have been murdered. And then we understood these are not terrorists, these are Jews who have been murdered. And all the bits and pieces of information that we have been getting, they're true, they're accurate. This is, like, again, but still something in our minds, like we couldn't comprehend what we're seeing. And as we keep driving, we're driving very, very fast, we pass a live firefight. There were a couple of police officers who managed to neutralize a terrorist who was walking around the side of the road, and we kind of caught that out of the corner of our eye. And it's like you're in a dream, a nightmare, but it's still, something about it didn't seem real. How could this be happening? We arrived at the entrance to Kfar Aza. There's a large parking lot and a gas station. We arrived there about 4:15, 4:30, which is right about sundown, before we change the clocks. And the Humvees all stop. We get out and we're waiting for orders. And as we're waiting for orders, we start hearing the air raid sirens, and we start taking mortar fire. Someone had spotted us. Someone from the Hamas had spotted us. They knew that they were there. They started shooting mortars at us. There's not too much you can do other than lie down and cover your neck and cross your legs and hope for the best. And then very quickly we got our orders. We were told that terrorists had overrun Kfar Aza, had overrun the town. There were currently firefights in the area where the houses are. Kfar Aza basically can be split into two. You have an area where people live, houses, and you have an area where it's an industrial and kibbutz area where there's some factories. We were told that there's heavy firefights in the areas where the families live. We're not going to go in there because the units that had managed to get there, you had active duty units, special forces, some police units, whoever was in the area and was able to get there were there. And right now we're about 300 soldiers. To put 300 soldiers in there will only increase the risk of friendly fire. And on the other hand, the assumption is that there are terrorists who also are hiding out in the industrial areas and waiting to strike. So we're going to go in there and we are going to neutralize them. And it's dark. The first thing that we noticed is already on the side of the parking area of Kfar Aza, there were bodies of soldiers that had been killed, that had already been taken out. Some of them had been covered, some of them had not been. And you hear just a lot of gunfire, a lot of explosions. And still, somehow, in the back of my mind, I think, in comparing notes with some of my friends, like it still doesn't seem like this can be real. That you can have an entire town that's over. And at the time, we never thought that it could be several towns, or that terrorists had already gotten to Sderot. I understand that you're going to the police station in Sderot. That the terrorists had overrun cities. And we, my company starts along with makes its way into Kfar Aza, and as soon as we cross the Shin Gimel, the big yellow gate that's at the entrance of Kfar Aza, we start taking fire. From about 20, 30 meters away, there was a terrorist who, knowing that the army was going to eventually come, was waiting out, hiding in some trees, and started shooting at us. The forward company, basically the platoon is broken up into three companies. The forward company returned fire. We took cover and started scanning to make sure that it wasn't a trap from both sides. The forward company returned fire. Luckily, the terrorists missed and was taken out by the forward team that was there. And that's when I think for most of us we finally, and it sounds strange to say this, that it took all of that for us to really understand what was going on. But I think that it's important to remember, especially for those who weren't here, all of this seems so much a stretch, so much, like I said, science fiction. Like it can't be that this is what's happening. That it really took a while to really understand. I think that unfortunately was true for much of the army. That it took a while to put the pieces together and understanding. But the second that someone's shooting at you, that kind of that puts things in perspective very, very quickly. So the forward company returned fire, and we continued, and we made our way to the area of the factory and the fields of Kfar Aza, and there's fire. It's not always clear, are they shooting at us? Is it other army units shooting back? Later we found out that we were basically the first, other than the individual active duty units that were there, we were the first major force, certainly the first battalion to make it to Kfar Aza. But there's shooting and there's explosions, and it's not always clear, are they shooting at us? Is it other units shooting? And there's a real concern also about what they call dutzim, friendly fire, because there are also just units that individuals that have made their way there. In addition, you have civilians who might be hiding. So we have to be very cautious, but on the other hand, we understand that we're at war. And I remember thinking that the unit I'm in 70 years ago in the 6-Day War, it happens to be it's the same company that the same reserve unit that freed the Kotel, and that's kind of always been our unit. All the stuff all the swag that our unit has, anything always has the Kotel on it, because we were the unit that freed the Kotel. And I think to myself, where have we gotten to that the unit that 70 years ago freed the Kotel now has to free a Jewish city that has been overrun? And we continue. we start taking fire, so we lie down, and all of a sudden my phone starts ringing, and I realize, I forgot to turn off my phone. And so I crawl to one of my friends. His name is Binun, and I say, Binun, this is embarrassing, but I need to ask you a favor. Can you open up the pouch on my back, and can you just turn off my phone for a second? And so he does. Later, a couple days later, I called that number back, and it was the Army calling me to let me know that I'd been called up. So if I hadn't figured it out by then, I got the official call up as we're crawling through. I think the first night, so we stayed. We cleared out the industrial area and the farm area of Kfar Aza. We met very minimal resistance. The fears that there were a lot of terrorists hiding there were fortunately unfounded. And then we started securing the fence, because the fear was that the Hamas is going to try to infiltrate again. And in fact, later they did, but this time we were ready for them. The army was ready for them, and they were unable to infiltrate. And so now, keep in mind, we haven't slept. It was also a simple story, so I was up very, very late the night before, but we haven't slept. We haven't gotten any food other than the kugel that I brought with me, that I was kind of handing out to my friends. They told us that right now the roads aren't safe, so they're not sending logistics in, so we're just going to have to manage for as long as we have to manage. And we start doing basically guard duty and patrols on the periphery to make sure that the Hamas doesn't try to infiltrate again. And they let us know that a smaller team from our battalion has gone into the area where the houses are in Kfar Aza, where, as I mentioned, there were smaller units that were already fighting from the afternoon on. And they are going to go house to house and see if there are any families left to save. And at about midnight or 1 a.m, we were told that we have to protect. There's going to be a convoy, if you will, of families that they were able to save. About 50 people, men, women, children, pets, were with the cover of our unit, were able to leave Kfar Aza. These are people that had been basically locked in their homes, locked in their bomb shelters since 6 a.m. So we're talking like 20 hours straight without really any sense of what was going on. And we were lucky enough that the unit was able to rescue them, but we also understood that if there are 50 that we are able to get out, that means that there are a lot that we have not been able to get out, and that it's probably too late for them. I understand you guys are going to the Knesset in a few days. So as our assessor mentioned, I work in the Knesset. In the Knesset, there's a very large painting on Komat HaMemshala, where the ministers have their offices. There's a very large painting, which is Jews being evacuated from a ghetto during the Holocaust. It was painted by a survivor, and it was donated to the Knesset. It's a very large painting, and I remember that was the first association I had, because the painting is just men, women, and children with whatever they have on their backs leaving, and that was the first association I had, was this painting, and I recognized that on the one hand, instead of these being people who are evacuated from a ghetto and sent to their death, these are families that we were able to save. But on the other hand, the fact that I'm witnessing a scene that reminds me more of saving more of a pogrom than it does a free, independent Jewish state, it was a very kind of difficult thing to internalize. The next morning, we were given orders to go from the industrial area to the area of the kibbutz where the families were, and that's when we really first got a sense of what had happened. The entrance to the settled area of the kibbutz is student apartments, small student apartments, and it was just, now there are groups that go on tours of Kfar Aza to see the destruction, and now they call that kind of walk Shvila Gehenom, the path of hell. And unfortunately, there's no real other word to describe it. You walk through, and the small apartments are burned, or on fire. and I apologize for some of the graphic descriptions, but I think it is important to understand bodies strewn everywhere, sometimes unidentifiable, sometimes the only thing that survived is, say, a pair of shoes that the person was wearing. And that's when we really started to understand the kind of the depths of the destruction and what had happened. Then the next step was to go house by house, and if there were families, to help them get out, if there were terrorists, to neutralize them. And unfortunately, the houses that we went to, almost without exception, either there were bodies, there were civilians that had been killed, or they were empty, and we understood that if they're empty, it means that if they're not from the families that we were able to get out, or were able to get out on their own, then they've been kidnapped. The last home we were in, which belongs to the Broditz family, they live right on the fence between the kibbutz and between the Gaza Strip. So we were in their home, and unfortunately, at a certain point, we had no choice but to eat their food, eat the food that they had prepared for Chag, because we had no food. There still were no logistical lines, and we needed something because we were now 2.5 days in, and so we ate the food that they had prepared for Chag. And we understood that we got some information that the husband, the father of the family, he was in the Kita Konanut, in the security unit, and he had been injured but was now in the hospital, and his family had been kidnapped. And I remember walking into as we were clearing out the houses, I remember walking into the kids' room and seeing a Paw Patrol doll on the floor, and remembering my son, who's right now in a bomb shelter in our house. And I think that for us, the understanding that we are witnessing, there's another word, we're witnessing a program, we're witnessing the kind of the worst butchering, and I apologize for the kind of the difficult language that have happened to Jews since the Holocaust. But it's happening in the Free Jewish State that's supposed to have an army, and the sense of shock and anger, but also I think humiliation. I spoke with one of the guys who was there, who took families out of their homes on that first night, and he said to me that the first thing that they said to them was, "What took you so long? Why are we here for almost 20 hours? And why is it reserve duty? Why is it reservists? Where is the army? Why is it that reservists who are called from their home are the first ones to get to us?" And I think then he didn't have an answer, and I don't think that we have an answer now. But I think it also fills us with a sense. There's a phrase in Hebrew, "lizgor ma'agal," to close a circle. I don't think that we felt we wanted revenge, though there is an aspect of that, as much as we wanted to lizgor ma'agal. There are people who have been killed, there are people who have been kidnapped, and right now we're fighting to take back Israeli towns. But the understanding is the next step has to be to take the fight to the Hamas and to their territory, and to destroy them. We were in Kfar Aza for 3 days. After the third day, the army basically said we have what's called shlita mivtza'it, operational control of the area. They replaced us with other units, and we went to go start training for what everyone assumed was going to be a war in the Gaza Strip. We trained in the south for about 3 or 4 days, until at about midnight we got woken up, or 2 a.m, we got woken up and told that there are intelligence reports up north that there might be combat, and so we all got yet again on the Humvees, and we drove up north. By the time we got there, what's called chazlash, in other words, the warning had been taken back. Whatever was feared that was going to happen up north hadn't happened, but we stayed up north training for the possibility of a war in Lebanon. So we started doing training in what's called tzvach, in areas with trees and boulders and the kind of environment you have up north. We were there for about a week and a half training up north, and then they told us, okay, now we're going back down south, and we're continuing training for an eventual combat in the Gaza Strip. At this point, the army had started going into the Gaza Strip, and we understood that we were going to be joining that. I mentioned that kind of the sense of we've seen the army and Am Yisrael in general at its lowest point. That's really the sense that I felt when we were down south, that we've really seen Am Yisrael at its lowest point, certainly in my lifetime, and maybe since the Yom Kippur War, probably even lower than that, maybe the lowest point since the Holocaust. But when the first time I was allowed to go home for a day and a half to visit my family, I got to our base in Bilu by Rehovot, and I got to my car, and I look out, and as far as the eye can see, the entire highway is just cars parked on the side. I had gotten there relatively early, so I didn't notice this, but you have hundreds, if not thousands of cars, all the shoulders of the highway, and it's just reservists who were called up, who dropped everything that they had, raced to their base, parked their car wherever they could, left their car behind, and went out. And on every single car, and it's thousands of cars, every single car, there was a note that said, "Thank you for what you're doing. If you need a cup of coffee before you drive home, call this number. If your car doesn't start and you need someone to jump you, call this number. If you need to borrow a car, call this number." And that gave me a sense that, yeah, I've seen Am Yisrael at its lowest, but I've also seen Am Yisrael at its highest. I've seen the cars of thousands of people who dropped everything to defend the state of Israel, and just everyday civilians who went car by car and said, if you need someone to start your car up, give me a call. If you need a cup of coffee, give me a call. And I don't want to talk too much about what's going on outside because my time is limited, and my experience is more what was going on the inside. But I understand from my wife and from my family and my community that the Hidgaisut, kind of the coming together of everyone. It's a shame that it takes this kind of incident to sometimes bring us together. But I really do think in these situations that we saw Am Yisrael at its highest. I said we were sent back down south to continue training. As we were driving down south in the buses that were taking us to the base, we actually passed a convoy. The Broditz family, the husband I said was in the hospital. The wife and children were freed in the first exchange that was done with Hamas. And so and much of that was because of the pressure that the army put on Hamas. They were willing to agree to that. And as we were driving down south, the convoy with the Broditz family drove past us. So for us, there was a sense, at least, we're beginning to start Lizgor Ma'agal, to come full circle. We trained the army all of a sudden, kind of out of nowhere, had to get used to, or had to learn to fight a war that it hasn't fought, whether it's fighting in debris or fighting in large multi-story complexes, or whether it's neutralizing tunnels, things that the army really hadn't trained, we hadn't trained, and so now we have 2 or 3 weeks to get this all together, and that's what we did. We trained, and starting December 4th, we were for 55 days in combat in the Gaza Strip. Twice during that period, I was able to go home and visit my family for about a day and a half. But more or less, we were cut off from civilization, as it were, and we were in combat. I think I've already gone over my time, so I will try to make it. I'll try to make it brief. But as I told you guys ahead of time, brevity is not my thing. We went in. I always remember the first day that we went in. We went in during the day. We went in on foot, and you have an entire battalion, 300, 400 soldiers, together with tanks, together with a D9, which is this massive, what's the word in English? Yeah, it's a massive bulldozer, armored bulldozer that clears the way. You have airplanes, and you have UAVs over us. And if on October 7th, I felt that I saw Tzahal, I saw the army at its lowest, an army that was unable to do the most basic thing that it needs to do, which is protect citizens, protect Jews, and it failed in that. You can't mince words. Here I felt, okay, the army is back on its feet, and now you see, and I am not a militaristic guy, far from it, but when you see the hundreds of soldiers and the tanks and all the other coming together, it's something that I think gave me confidence and gave me pride. And also a sense of we're doing this together. I look around in my company, which is about 25 guys. So you have religious, non-religious, former religious, and one guy who learns here in Machon Lev. Even you have left wing, right wing. We had a lot of time to talk politics, so at a certain point we got sick of it. But you have left wing, you have right wing, you have people my age, 37. You have people who are even older in their 40s. You have guys who just got out of active duty a few months ago. This is their first time doing reserve duty. You have people with families. You have single people. We have gays, straight. Every single part of Israeli society is there, and you see them, and you see us going in together to defend the Jewish people. I think that's something that's along with all the difficult memories. I think that's something that I'll always kind of take with me. That sight of us working together and putting aside the ideological differences that we have and the very legitimate debates and disagreements that we have, and putting them aside. We were given basically 3 missions. Our unit was given 3 missions. One was to clear out the area. This was in what's called Gizrat Khan Yunis, the area of Khan Yunis. My unit didn't go into the city itself, but rather the neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city. And our job was to clear them out to allow for a logistical road to basically be paved. The army basically paved a logistical road into Khan Yunis to locate and destroy Hamas infrastructure and terrorists, and to take out of commission the unit that's based in that neighborhood. The way that the Hamas works is that their units are based in neighborhoods, based on people that live in those neighborhoods and homes in those neighborhoods. That's where they base their units. So our job was to do that. It took us a little longer than expected. At first, they told us we're going in for 2 weeks, and after that, we'll talk. 2 weeks turned into 2 months, basically 2.5 months. But we were able to complete all of our objectives and to clear out those areas. One thing which I think it's important to understand is, and this surprised me, even though maybe in the back of my head I knew, that the manner in which everything there was dedicated to terror infrastructure. We were in civilian neighborhoods, and the number of tunnel shafts that we found, the number of homes that were booby-trapped, the number of hiding spots for weapons, the number of terrorist operatives in every single place that we went, it never ceased to amaze me the way in which everything, all of the resources of these were 2 rather large neighborhoods. Everything, one was more urban, one was more suburban. Everything there, the sense of everything there was dedicated to terror and terror infrastructure. Now, we would go from home to home, clearing out the homes. There were no civilians there, with 1 or 2 exceptions. We almost never saw civilians. There were also, most of the time, the Hamas operatives didn't stay to fight. They left behind booby traps, they left behind a sniper or 2, and they ran, or they went into their tunnels. If they went into the tunnels, so the army has ways of basically triggering explosions within the tunnels. And so most of the terrorists that we encountered them in the sense that we knew that they went into their tunnels, and then we were able to use the different tools that the army has to take them out. Though on rare occasion they did kind of stand their ground and fight. But the sense was that we were in homes where, for as near as we can tell, the person who lives in this home is not connected to terror, but their neighbor has a tunnel in their shared courtyard. Or we were in a home where, from inside the home, we can tell that these people are loyal to the PLO and Abu Mazen and not Hamas, and yet there's still weapons that are hidden under a bed. There was one home we were in where it looked like it was just a normative person, and then in the child's room we found, in like the diaper drawer, we found just a lot of grenades. And you know, it's a rather fraught question to what extent people living in Gaza support Hamas or live under a dictatorship. I'm not talking about just direct Hamas operatives, but be that as it may, the thing that kind of took me aback was the clear understanding that whatever they feel about Hamas or about Israel, they certainly know what's going on, because the number of tunnels and the number of weapons and just the way in which everything there is dedicated to terror, clearly everyone knew what was going on. And I don't want to get into the more fraught political, ideological question. What does that mean? What does it mean now? What does it mean going forward? But it's certainly something that took me by surprise. The army works very methodically. The first we went in 2 or 3 kilometers. which may not sound like a lot, but in terms of the army and hundreds of soldiers, thousands of soldiers, going that deep is exceptional. The army basically decided, if up until then they had gone a few hundred meters each day to try to catch the enemy by surprise and go in with a more deeper thrust and then capture the territory, and that's what we did. And it worked well. On that first day, we met minimal resistance. We took some light machine gun fire and a couple of anti-tank missiles that were shot at us. But luckily, there were no casualties, and we were able to take out the enemy operatives, whether by bringing in on the radio, telling a tank where to shoot, or bringing in a helicopter, or my tzemet, the guy who's next to me, I think battle buddy is the term they use in English. So he's like a super soldier. So he also took out a couple of Hamas operatives while I covered his back. I take credit for it too because I was there with him. But and the army works very methodically. Once we had, after a couple of weeks when the area that we were in was cleared out and we were able to go onto the roofs of the building, one of the members of our unit, during the time when we were in training, when we had a day off, he went to the hotels by the Dead Sea where the people who live in the south are currently living because they can't be in their homes. And he went and he visited the survivors from Kfar Aza, and he got to know them. He developed a relationship with them, and they gave him an Israeli flag, which one of the residents of Kfar Aza had taken with him when he left, when he escaped, and he asked Kotza, is my friend's name, and he asked Kotza to take that with him, and when the opportunity presented itself, to raise the flag. And so when we had the opportunity, when the roofs were safe to go on there, when we felt there's no more problems of snipers or other units in the area, we went there and we raised the flag that was given to us by the people of Kfar Aza. The flag is still there, even though we've left. The army continues to operate there, and the flag is still there. And that was another sense for me that we're starting Lizgor Magal. We're starting to come full circle. The army works methodically, but unfortunately there's still casualties and there's still deaths. And even now as we speak, there's still units that are fighting. It's important. My chapter in this story has ended, but the war continues, and I'm sure you'll get a sense of that more when you're down south. I think it's important to remember that. I want to mention a member of my company, Nitzan Shessler, who was killed. I said that mostly the Hamas didn't stay to fight; they left behind booby traps, but there were times when they stayed. We were on a mission clearing out a series of homes which we knew belonged to senior Hamas operatives, and as my platoon cleared out a building, three-story building, and then Nitzan's platoon went to their building, and as they were inside the building, a Hamas operative kind of appeared out of a tunnel in the courtyard of the house and opened fire. He wounded two soldiers and he killed Nitzan Shessler. Nitzan was 21 years old. He had just gotten out of active duty a few months before the war, and he could have easily gotten out of doing reserve duty, but he didn't. He was killed almost on the spot. I went to a memorial service for Nitzan a few weeks ago, and his father, Erez, spoke and said that Nitzan, growing up, was very anti-religious. He had very little patience for religion or religious people, and Erez said that he remembers telling him before he went into the army that, you say you don't like religious people now, but I guarantee you your best friend's going to end up being someone religious. And that's what happened. His best friend, Haris, was a religious guy from Akko, and they were in active duty together, and they made sure to be in reserve duty together. And Haris was with Nitzan when he was hit, and Nitzan's last words was Harris's name. He called out to Harris, and then his systems failed, and he died. And it's a heartbreaking story, but the point that Erez, Nitzan's father, was making, and the point that I take with me, is that the army, for better or for worse, is one of the last places in Israeli society where we really all are together, and when the differences between religious and non-religious really don't make a difference. and we all find a way to work together. And so that story is difficult as it is for me. That's kind of something that's always given me strength in remembering Nitzan and remembering the manner in which we work together. Some very quick closing thoughts, and then if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. First of all, like I said, it's important to understand that the work is not done. My unit has finished its chapter, but the combat continues. I really feel that it's a tremendous zchut, a tremendous honor and privilege that I've had to serve in the army, to do reserve duty. And I said to Dvoranit, the last phone call I had with my wife, with Dvoranit, before we went in, which is obviously a very difficult phone call because they take our phones away, and I didn't. The next time I spoke with her was about a month later. But the thing I said to her is that I really am grateful for the zchut that I have, and that my tefillah, my prayer is that I'll be worthy of it. There's still a lot of pain and sadness from the 7th of October, from friends, whether it's Nitzan in my unit or a couple of close friends who were killed in combat, some of whom I only found out about their deaths much later, after I finished, because inside you don't get so much information. But what gives me chizuk is the understanding that on the one hand I saw Am Yisrael at its lowest, but I also felt that, and I feel that I'm seeing Am Yisrael at its greatest. I saw, unfortunately, probably the greatest failure in the IDF's history, but also I've seen its greatest strength, which is the fact that everyone comes together, and when we're needed, that without exception, people answer the call. And the military, when I say that, the military strength, the advanced weapons systems, the equipment that we have, I mean that, but what I really mean is the togetherness and the willingness for people to sacrifice one for another. People who, outside of the army, we would probably argue and yell at each other and not have much to do with each other, but when we're together and we're serving together, we're willing to sacrifice, and all those things fade away. And I hope, and this might even sound cliche, but I hope that moving forward, the state of Israel and the people of Israel are able to take that with them moving forward, because Am Yisrael, without any connection to the war, is certainly in need of a ripui, of a healing, and it's my hope and my tefillah that that things have been put into perspective, and moving forward, that Am Yisrael will continue to stay together the way that it was inside for my comrades and I. So I thank you guys for giving me a chance to speak. And I hope that they give some sort of framework for the visit you guys are doing down south tomorrow. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. Yeah. So the army, the call-up itself wasn't official. There wasn't the normal bureaucratic orders, the way that it has to work. Once we were called up, so then we were inside the framework of the army. We got orders, and the army knew where we were. That being said, it was in Hebrew, as they say, a balagan. Like, it was a big mess. So our commanders knew where we were, obviously, but I don't know to say if all the way up the chain of the command, necessarily where everyone knew where all the units were. I have to give a lot of credit to my Magad, my Mefaked, the battalion commander, because he made a decision that if he misjudged things, he's a reservist, so I don't think he'd be so worried about losing his job, but the cost of calling up a unit, both social and militarily, money-wise, he took a huge risk to call us up on his own, and you know, b'zchut zeh, there were dozens of families in Kfar Aza that were saved, that otherwise wouldn't have been saved. So the army, the commanders knew where we were, but I don't know to what extent all the way up the chain of command, if they really understood what was going on. Because one of the challenges it took a while for the army to connect the dots between the individual, and unfortunately, the shock and disbelief that I have, I think, went also through the army, and that created part of the tragedy.
When you were driving, you said you were kind of like, you weren't really like, didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah.
Did you like at any point feel like overwhelmed or like?
So I think that as it's happening, there wasn't much time to think and internalize what was going on. It doesn't mean that you're not scared, sad, but it's just not. You don't have the time to really understand. Like it just doesn't. It doesn't. You're not internalizing it. There was on the second night when we were guarding the fence of Kfar Aza, and later the Hamas tried to infiltrate, and a different platoon was able to take out the Hamas operatives. So then there was like a little bit of time to all of a sudden internalize, and it's overwhelming. But you look around at your comrades, at your peers, the people you're serving with, and you know that they're in this together. There were difficult moments. One of the members of my unit had basically a panic attack, and we had to the Chovshim, the medics had to get him out of there for his own health until we continue. So it's not like you're completely oblivious to what's going on, but you kind of, as you're working, as you're doing. There's a member of my platoon who is a clinical psychologist when he's not in reserve duty. So he was giving us advice as we're going on how to internalize things. But it's a challenge, and I think the truth is that now, for the past 4 months I've been in the Army. I haven't had much time to really think and internalize. Now is more the time when I'm working through kind of the things that I've experienced. And so I thank you guys for this opportunity, because I think for also me it's very healthy and very helpful. And I'll just say that the Army is much better. When I was in reserve duty, or when I was in active duty, we saw some very difficult things, and the Army didn't seem to be aware or care of our mental and emotional health. And it wasn't something that was really talked about. And now the Army puts a lot of resources into the mental and emotional health of the soldiers during and especially after. So that's something that certainly helped.
When you were packing your bags and stuff, what's one thing that kind of you're really, really happy that you brought with you? And what's one thing that maybe you wish you would have brought with you?
So this is going to sound my toothbrush. I'm really happy I brought my toothbrush. When I was in active duty and we went to Gaza, I was like, a toothbrush and war. Who needs a toothbrush? And I didn't bring a toothbrush, and I regret it. And I also ended the Army with like 6 cavities. So I'm really glad I brought my toothbrush. Also, it's something that reminds you of normalcy. And it's important to remember. I gave you kind of like the highlights, but much of war and combat is sitting around waiting for orders, waiting to see if the enemy attacks, waiting for nightfall, waiting for daybreak. So dental hygiene is important, and there's time for it. I'm glad I did that. I didn't realize when we were going, we didn't realize how long we would be gone for. And in my head, they're calling us up, and then we'll start training. So I didn't bring just enough undershirts and things like that, kind of the things that you don't think you're going to need and flip-flops. I didn't bring flip-flops. And then when we were first given the first chance to shower a couple weeks in, when we were in training, and I didn't have flip-flops, you don't want to, maybe you guys can identify living in the dorms, but flip-flops are important to have. So somebody made me. They took this cardboard stuff and they cut out flip-flops with a rubber band. So I had these makeshift flip-flops, and then I got flip-flops. Some company donated a ton of flip-flops, and I had. So that was good.
Just a logistics question. In
Yeah.
your story, you said when you went up north, you took the Humvees up north.
Yeah. So.
And then did you leave them there? Because you said you took a bus back down.
Oh, okay. So I'm impressed by that question. So I should say that what happened, I also mentioned that in the beginning there aren't enough Humvees for the entire dude, for the entire battalion. So we only had Humvees for about half of us, and then buses for half of us. So the truth is I was actually on one of the buses. Some people went up in Humvees, some people went up in buses, and then on the way back I think the same people took the Humvees down, took the buses down. So, but there's a lot of logistics. Listen, as I am as simple as a foot soldier as they come. I'm not an officer, I'm not involved in logistics. The Army did a very good job in terms of logistics, at least from my vantage point. And so all these things, where the bus is going to come from, where the Humvees are going to come from, it all worked out.
When you were talking about
I'm sorry, I missed the first.
when you were talking about skills,
Yeah.
does any of you guys always have one happens on that is happening in the thoughts?
So that's a really good question. No, if only because it seems so mufrach, they say in Hebrew, so ridiculous what was happening. I told you, no one really quite understood and internalized what was going on down south. So it didn't pop into my head that maybe something like this could happen in Efrat. When I came back the first time, I was more on edge. All of a sudden, I see, okay, we're just several hundred meters from Bethlehem, from Beit Lechem, and if hundreds of people from Beit Lechem were to decide just to storm Efrat, what would happen? Then it started to kind of click more. I mean, I know that for my wife and kids, they basically for the first week or two, just like they moved into the room of the shelter in our house, because my wife understood that if bombs fall and there were sirens, she has a minute and a half, but she's not going to be able to. We have 4 kids. My youngest at the time was 2 months old. Now 6 months old. We have 4 kids. My wife can't get all of the kids on her own, so they just put all the mattresses in the bomb shelter. So that was more, but like I was in a different world. I was in the army, and so kind of only after the fact was I concerned about that. But like, for example, if someone in the neighborhood who went around, bomb shelters can't be locked from the inside, because if security personnel or medical personnel need to get in, they want to be able to. So you can't really lock the bomb shelters from the inside. But what happened on the 7th of October, unfortunately I saw this up close, is that terrorists went into the bomb shelters and people would have to try to physically hold it shut. So there were people in the neighborhood who made for every family like a wooden bar that you can stick to lock it from the inside. And it seemed, like I said, it's kind of things that never dawn on you, and then all of a sudden they're in this new reality. So the first couple times I went home afterwards, there was a concern, but at the time it wasn't. Again, it was so. It seems so just out of the. I don't even know how to describe how the sense of like this can't be happening. So the sense that it could also happen in our town was not something that really I thought about at the time, but afterwards, yeah.
How have you processed the emotions and the trauma and all those feelings now, 4 or 5 months?
So it's a good question. Like I said, the Army puts a lot of resources. After we finished, we had what's called the Yom Ibud, which is and basically all units, no matter what they saw or didn't see, all units have these Yomei Ibud, where you have a Kaban, Katzin B'rut Nefesh, which is either a psychologist or someone with a master's degree in social work and special training, and we have conversations with the guys. I think it helps also that we are reservists, we're older, we're more able to talk about our emotions and talk about our fears and what we're going through. It hasn't been easy. Also, part of me thinks that, I didn't have, the last 4 months when Israeli society has been kind of grappling with what happened, internalizing and starting to move on, not in a bad sense, but in a good sense of continuing life, we didn't have that. So I think for myself and for some of my peers, now we're kind of going through that. I would almost call it like the nearest I can think is kind of being in avelut, in mourning, because I didn't have the 4 months to internalize and make peace with what happened, both personally but on a national level. So it's tough. There are times when this is rather morbid, but there was the other day I was driving home at night, and there was a car stopped on the side of the road, and it reminded me of cars stopped on the side of the road where we saw people who had been killed. And so that kind of was a bit triggering and difficult, but I'm lucky that I have, in addition to my friends from the Army that I can talk to, my wife is a lawyer, but before she was a lawyer, she was a social worker, so she's good at listening. And so I feel I can talk to them. I think that Israeli society has matured a lot, certainly in comparison to when I was in active duty, where this is something that's talked about, the Army is aware of it, Israeli society is aware of it, and I think that helps a lot. And so I know that if I need to talk to someone, if I need help, that it's available to me.
Besides obviously the mental strain,
Yeah.
how do you manage like militarily, skill-wise, physically going into that kind of situation without obviously training for years for it?
Yeah. So I do reserves. I've been in reserves now for 12, 13 years. It gets harder as I get older, but I'm like, it's. The training was difficult. Basically, you going back into army shape. Army shape is also a little different than like normal being in shape. Putting on a backpack with like 20, 30 kilo, which for the American guys, I apologize, I have no idea how much that is. 70 pounds. Like that's it's a lot. It's tough. But because we're reservists, so like I know that if this is a little too heavy for me, I can say to the guy next to me who's a little maybe younger, stronger, and say, hey, can you take some of my weight? Can you take a couple of the backup ammunition that I have? Because it's just a bit much. And a lot of it ultimately is mental. Like when you understand why you're fighting, why you're doing this, and that it's hard for everyone. It's hard, and with the exception of the younger guys who got out of the Army a few months beforehand got out of active duty, it's tough for all of us, and we kind of push ourselves through. But it's not easy, and there's plenty of guys who have knee injuries or foot problems that they're dealing with now. Even as we were training, they brought some physical therapists to work with us. I mentioned that we have a psychologist in our unit. We also have a physical therapist slash massage therapist. So he was also helping us out, which is one of the things about reserve duties that you have. In addition to people from all over, you have everyone comes with their own background. So the psychologist, there's also a guy in our unit who has a PhD in neuroscience, and his field of specialty is trauma. So he was giving a lot of advice. There's guys who are engineers. I mentioned the guy who studies here in Machon Lev rather. He's studying structural engineering, and so when we would go into houses, he would say, this house looks like it's not strong. Let's go into a different house. And so everyone brings to their field. I'm a researcher, so mostly what I was interested in is I was like, we can really learn a lot about Palestinian society from being in their homes, and this really makes me wonder about Islam. And people were less interested in that stuff. But the last report that I wrote and published at work before the war had to do with different models of military drafts in different countries, and what does it mean when a country goes from a mandatory draft, Gius Chovah, we call it in Hebrew, to a voluntary or professional army, and so I had lots of thoughts about that and about the nature of the Israeli volunteer army, which I think proved itself this time around, and I'm going to have to update some of the things that I wrote. So everyone kind of brings from what they have.
Western media very much likes to portray what's going on in Gaza differently depending on the news outlet. For someone who was there, what was the civilian damage truly like in a way that the way they say the word genocide and things like that? Was it so severe? Was there as little consideration for human life as CNN likes to say or whatever? Things like that. From your perspective, like what really went on there?
So I have to preface what I'm going to say by saying, first of all, that I can only speak to my limited perspective as a simple foot soldier, and I've basically checked out of watching foreign news media, but also Israeli news media, because it's I need some space. So I can't necessarily, but I'm obviously well aware of the things that you're saying. Genocide, obviously, no. I'm not a lawyer. My wife's a lawyer, but there's a legal definition to genocide or ethnic cleansing. All those very loaded terms, but we're certainly not doing that. So I think that's absurd to the point where I know that we have to represent ourselves in The Hague or whatever, but I don't feel the need to really engage with those kind of things. In terms of, listen, the Hamas, and as I described, the Hamas has overtaken, they're overtaken civilian areas, and the question of to what extent are these civilians willingly involved, to what extent do they have no choice because they live in a dictatorship, I don't know. But as far as but it's everywhere. This is kind of a non sequitur, but you guys study with Rabbi Ebner, so you're okay with tangents and non sequiturs, right? One of the homes that we were in, the husband was worked for the Islamic Jihad. He was a fighter for the Islamic Jihad, and we found weapons, and we found flags, and we found masks. And we also found a mug that was given out at a symposium for International Women's Day, the UNRWA's International Women's Day, because his wife works for the UN, and it said on it in Arabic and in English, "Women's dignity is priceless." And when I'm inside, and this also caught my eye because one of the committees I work with in the Knesset is the Women's Rights Committee, and we always have to put out a big report for International Women's Day. So I mention that because it overlap so much that it's hard to separate civilian from terror infrastructure, and it's literally everywhere. So that puts the army in a very difficult position, because if we are to avoid anywhere that's civilian, I'm talking about buildings and homes, I'm not talking about people, because there are only 2 or 3 incidents where we ran into civilians that were still there, and we told them to take a white flag, we showed them where to go. There's one time when we arrested him because there was reason to think that he was involved in terror, but it wasn't clear. Another non sequitur, and then I'll get back to your very serious question, and I'll stop with the less serious. There was one, we were clearing out an area of houses, and all of a sudden from about 100, 200 meters away, Americans, I apologize, it's like a football field, I think, 100 meters. So we see a white flag, and very quickly realize that it was a local civilian. We have someone there who speaks Arabic, that is his job. He got a speaker out and said to the guy to come forward to undress so we could make sure that he didn't have any bombs or weapons on him. And then they started interviewing him. And he said that he lives in the area. He and his family had gone to the places like the camp towns where they had sent them. But he got into a fight with his wife, and so he just decided to come back to his home where we're now operating. And all the single guys were like, there's no way that this guy fought with his wife and now he's coming back to a war zone. And all the married guys were like, could be. We get that. So we really, from my vantage point, do our best to avoid civilian casualties, to avoid even interacting with civilians. But when it comes to infrastructure and homes, it's so overlapped that the only way in which to neutralize Hamas infrastructure is to be in civilian areas. And at times, like the areas that the army is in and operating, there's a lot of destruction. There's a lot of homes that we have no choice but to clear out with live fire to destroy. And if the army is going to have to decide what risk to take, they're going to side with the side of protecting our soldiers. I've seen numbers out there that the civilian, even by the Hamas's own statements, which need to be taken with a rather large grain of salt, like the civilian to combatant ratio is unheard of in Western countries in urban combat. And the Army really does everything that it can. It's frustrating to see those kind of claims. Nothing's perfect. I'm sure that there's places that the Army could improve, but it's frustrating to see those claims. I see up close how we put ourselves at risk in order to avoid as much as possible civilian casualties, and then kind of to be taken to task for not doing that is difficult and frustrating. But that's kind of the ways. I also say that I'm pretty, I'll tell you a little myself, I'm pretty liberal when it comes to politics, certainly American politics. I'm pretty progressive, and it's difficult to see that like a lot of people who I would see as my partners in the struggle for civil rights, for a lot of liberal progressive causes, seem to just be completely off the rockers when it comes to Israel, and all of a sudden that we're some sort of like murderous, like it's very difficult for me also on a personal level, but I don't really know. But certainly I can say that from my vantage point, the Army does everything it can to minimize civilian casualties, and our hand is forced that we have to operate in civilian areas, and we cause a lot of damage to civilian infrastructure because that's also where the terror infrastructure is.
You know what's going on with the arrests and terrorists at the moment, where they're being put on?
I saw a thing in the news that they're being held in the basically Israeli prisons. There's civilian prisons, if you will, and then there's security prisons. So I saw that they're being held in security prisons, that they're not necessarily be given. Normally, even terrorists that are arrested are in like prison cells that are more or less the equivalent of civilian criminal cells. My understanding that they're held in different areas because there's still a lot of intelligence information that can be taken from them. And also, I think that Israel understands that we're dealing with what they say the Nukhba, which is kind of the forward teams or the special forces of the Hamas, that Israel is still trying, the army is still trying to understand the inner workings, and so it's important to have them in holding and to interrogate them. But more than that, I don't know. And anything I know is just from what I've read in the news. I don't have any inside information. When we captured terrorists alive, they were sent back for questioning, and that's kind of the last we had anything to do with them.
What was your specific role in your operation in this area? Like, what were you responsible for?
So
You had your battle buddy.
yeah, so I'm just like up until a few years ago, I was what's known as a magis, which is this heavy machine gun that weighs about 12, 13 kilo. Again, Americans, I apologize. Was that like 25 pounds? It's heavy. And about 2 or 3 years ago, going back to your question about like physically, about 2 or 3 years ago, I went up to my commanding officer and I was like, listen, I just turned 35, and carrying this like 30-pound gun with all the ammunition and with everything, I think it's time to give someone else a chance. And so they gave one of the younger guys a chance. So now I'm just like a normal foot soldier. I learned during the training, I learned how to use some rocket-propelled missiles, something called a Matador, which is like so. So I kind of picked up some new skills because I got to keep myself relevant. But I'm just like a normal, and the way that it works, okay, so there's intelligence tells us there's a complex of 5 or 6 houses, 3 or 4 story houses, apartment buildings, that one belongs to a Hamas operative, and there's been surveillance has, the UAVs have noticed that there's people operating there, and maybe even they've noticed some terror cells operating there, and now we're going to go in, and we go, first the tanks, and maybe some helicopters, and then the D9s, the bulldozers, knock a hole in the wall, and then we go in and we go room by room, and we clear them out, live fire if we feel there's a threat, and we clear them out. So like that's kind of the day in, day out. And then also I mentioned that part of our job was opening up the logistical corridor, and so doing patrols there. But I'm basically just a foot soldier who luckily was able to get rid of that massive heavy machine gun because I'm getting up there a bit. But it's not easy physically. But that's kind of the day in, day out. All right, thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
So I very much want to thank Rami on behalf of the yeshiva and on behalf of the family too. I mean, there's no question about it. I'm very, very proud. Okay.